Hey everyone. I'm back. My name is Chand. And again, I'm going to be talking about this excellent article that I read about Introduction to Archetypal Astrology by Richard Tarnas. Uh, Again, my name is Chand. I'm board certified in internal medicine. Most of my life has been in internal medicine, but then after a severe chronic illness, uh, and what was required for me to recover from that was kind of like this awakening, or this started me on the spiritual journey in this way. And one of the modalities which was really helpful for me was astrology. Yes, I talk about astrology more than just, you know, uh, which is totally fine to look at it for fun and games, which I do also, but actually as a healing modality, which is how it's always been used traditionally, except in the last, I would say, 100 years. So, anyways, without further ado, I want to dive into this article, which I think is one of the best introductions to astrology, period, that I've read. Okay, there's so many introductions, but I found this to be a really important one. And this is Richard Tarnas who's talking about archetypal astrology. And we'll get to that. Now, personally, if you've been following me, uh, me and Shikha, then we've been talking about evolutionary astrology. And this is related to that. So, anyways, without further ado, let's get to the first part. And I've just highlighted a few things about here, which stood out to me from the article, and I'm going to talk about them. So, one of the first thing that he spoke about, is, again, if you understand the natal chart, is kind of a snapshot. So, you're on the globe. Let's say that this is, uh, let's say this is the Earth, right? Or, yeah, let's say this is Earth. I'm trying to find a ball or something, right? And you are here, right? Now, at that particular time, date, etc., exact specific time where you were born, the sky from your view was arranged in a certain way, right? And so it's kind of a portrait of the heavens at the moment of one's birth, as the article says, right? Um, and what's happening here is that the planets, the way they're arranged, they have a fundamental cosmically based connection to specific archetypal forces or principles. We'll stop there, right? Planets in general have this kind of cosmic connection to certain archetypal forces or principles which are universal, and they influence human existence. So, right, so the way we normally think about, when I was thinking about astrology, was that, okay, there's kind of a physical influence, like, okay, Jupiter has mass and it affects gravity, a very Newtonian way of thinking about it, right, rather than a more quantum uh, way of thinking about it. We're talking about archetypal forces or principles which influence human existence. And this is, a planet will do that. And the patterns which are formed by planets, the different relationships the planets have with them, they these specific patterns, they have a meaningful correspondence to the patterns of human affairs on Earth. Meaningful correspondence. And I'll tell you why that's important. We're not saying that this is affecting what's happening on Earth. We'll get to that, but they have a meaningful correspondence. And this is one of the important bases of astrology, right? And so the article starts off with this. And I think this is a beautiful, beautiful way of putting at it, right? And this is exactly what's happening, is that this is the introduction to astrology. Now, further on, we basically talk about that the positions, please excuse my typo, the positions of the planets at the time and place of a person's birth, right? At that particular time or place, they're regarded as corresponding to the basic archetypal patterns of that person's life and character, right? And again, I'm going to get to the definition of archetype, but this will all make sense then. The way they're arranged, that there's a basic archetypal pattern of that person's life and character. So when you're born, your life and your character will have a certain archetypal pattern. And then they also talk about, further on, you'll be able to get more of an understanding of one's life, its cycles, its transitions, its ups and downs, crises, breakthroughs, major changes or whatever, through the study of transits. Because when the planets, when you took photograph, or if you take a photo of the planets, were poop, at that time they were there, but then the planets are also currently moving, right? They're currently moving around. I mean, the planets, and they say this in the article, he says this in the article, the transits occur when planets currently in the sky, they form, geometrical patterns with respect to the planetary positions of one's birth, right? So the planets kept moving, like, they didn't stop, obviously. And then they're forming geometrical patterns. The nature of those patterns, which planets are involved and how are they involved, right? How are they positioned? They appear to correlate in a strikingly consistent way with the archetypal character of the experiences one tends to have at that time, right? I'm going to repeat this, is that when you're born, there's a basic archetypal pattern, striking correspondence. So do the transits. Which planets are transiting and how they're affecting the natal positions. Striking, in a strikingly consistent way, there is a correlation to the archetypal character of the experience that one has had. Now we're going to move on to another part, which I believe to be one of the most important parts. And this is basically three preliminary issues. So these are three issues which she tackles right at the beginning. And I believe this is like so important because these are the questions which really clear up a lot of confusion, right? So we're going to talk about these things. And the first one of them is going to be archetypes, right? And again, this can be an hour lecture on each one of these, but I'm just going to talk about the definition of archetypes, which he says, for our present purposes, we can define archetype as a universal principle of force that affects the human psyche and human behavior on many levels. The effect can be impelled, structure, permeates, etc. But there is more to that. When we think about archetypes, for example, we do know that archetypes. Now, for example, an archetype is, the most common, let's say Mars, right? Mars is an archetype. You imagine a warrior, right? You imagine somebody who's going to war. Just a general, archetypes are all around us, by the way. Characters in movies, right? Like, they're all around us. We all imagine that. We all imagine an inner warrior, a lover, a magician. These are all archetypes, right? So basically, the idea is that archetypes, they seem to have this transcendental, mythical quality, yet they also have very specific psychological expressions. So, for example, the desire of love, experience of beauty, which is Venus as an archetype, or the impulse towards aggression, which is kind of like Mars, right? And the idea is they seem to work both within and without. That means they can express themselves as impulses or images from the interior psyche inside you, yet also as events and situations in the world, right? So, anyways, Jung specifically, and we'll get to this in this point. The article says that and Tarnas writes about that Jung thought of archetypes as the basic constituents of the human psyche, shared cross-culturally by all human beings. So they're basic constituents of the human psyche. Cross-culturally, they're shared amongst all human beings, and he regarded them as universal expressions of a collective unconscious. Collectively, there's an unconscious, universal expressions, parts of the human psyche. And Plato sort of said that, again, this is more psychological, right? Plato said that this is also more cosmic. This is more objective. As primordial forms of a universal mind that transcend the human psyche. So this is something which is inside and outside. And what astrology does is it appears to support both the views, the Platonic view, as well as the Jungian view. Since it gives evidence that Jungian archetypes are not only visible in the human psychology, in human experience and behavior, but are also linked to the macrocosm itself, right? To the planets and movements and the movements of the heavens. So this is this kind of, the idea of anima mundi, which is, or there's a world soul in which the human psyche participates. So anyways, from this perspective, and the article says, what Jung called the collective unconscious can be viewed as being ultimately embedded within the cosmos itself, right? So anyways, I don't know if some of this is landing or not, but this is what the archetypes generally mean. These kinds of universal forces which are affecting human behavior, but they're also represented in the cosmos, right? And that is archetypal astrology. So when we're talking about archetypes, when you're talking about planets and houses and signs, specifically evolutionary astrology moves more towards archetypes. And we'll get more into that. The second issue is free will versus determinism. Because this is the biggest question that I always had was, so you're trying to say that planets are causing this. That means I can do anything, right? That means, and that is honestly why I even moved away from astrology in the beginning, because it got so overwhelming and I felt powerless. I truly felt powerless. I was like, okay, if I don't have any free will and if all of this is predetermined, we were told like, destiny or fate, the difference between them, but this is fate. This is going to happen. You can't do anything about it, right? That will make you feel powerless. And I don't think that's actually true. Personally, I don't think so true. And that's not also what evolutionary astrology or archetypal astrology believes. And this is what he says. He says that the astrology's an emancipatory character also derives from the fact that the more deeply we understand the archetypal forces that affect our lives, the more free we can be in our dealings with them. And this is actually really important because if you're all together are unconscious of these potent forces, let's say we have no idea that there is something which there are other forces outside of us, there are repressed, and things inside of us. We're puppets of the archetypes, right? Um, we then act according to the unconscious motivations without any possibility of our being intelligent agents interacting with those forces. And I think that is why I am now, and I have been understanding astrology at a deeper level. That is that is truly the emancipatory or the liberatory character here. Because Jung definitely said that, and again, this was during my healing journey, which I recognized that there were so many things that I was unaware of about myself. And those instincts or those impulses were running my life. These were patterns. Like, you call them patterns. You call them like, we can shame ourselves by saying, there are like issues with us, but, where anger can be one of them. Where is this coming from? A pattern of constantly getting into same kinds of relationships, over giving or under giving, and, all these kind of like things which are constantly repeating. And we keep thinking, why is this happening to us? And constantly blaming the outside world, which sure, obviously that is also issue, but that'll leave you in a total victim mindset rather than like actually getting some agency of control back, right? So we all know, there's a Jung had said this, that till you make the unconscious conscious, it will run your life and you will call it fate. And I think this is where astrology also comes in, is that once we understand these forces, we're actually able to modulate ourselves. We actually know what we need to work with. That actually gives us true power. Uh, and there's another thing which is that from this point of view, yes, yeah, astrology illuminates the fundamental archetypal dynamics that profoundly condition our lives, which is not to say they absolutely determine our lives. And so, this discussion itself, I believe, between free will and determinism, is everything predetermined or is it all free will? I understand it to be somewhere in the middle, the answer here. And it says that yes, there is some free will, given that you understand what forces you're going to be dealing with, and uh, actually opening up your options rather than this one option or a certain program constantly running your life, running your life. Then are you truly free there? You know what I mean? In this sense, knowledge, or in this sense, knowing, does liberate someone. Uh, can liberate someone in that sense. So anyway, this is the one topic which he deals with, which I love the way he deals. Please read the article. I'll put it in the link in the description below. And then finally is the causal mechanism. And I believe like this is something really important. And this is a great line from this article. Says that planets are not themselves causing anything to be happening in our lives as any more than the hands on a clock are now causing it to be 7:30 p.m. Right? And this is so important, right? Is the hand of the clock causing us to be 7:30? Right? So this is a great way of looking at this. A great analogy. Planets are indicative of the cosmic state of the archetypal forces at that time. Right? Now, to understand this, I think we will have to get more into evolutionary astrology, get into past lives and stuff like that, which are able to actually explain what might be going on. I won't get into that right now, but I do want to say that this is the causal mechanism, is the question of why astrology works. There is just too much evidence. It's just too complex, right? For this to be explained purely by a physical thing that, okay, the weight of this planet is causing something to happen on Earth, which is then that physical force is affecting us. I don't know. He says that I believe that a more plausible and comprehensive explanation is that the universe is informed and pervaded by a fundamental holistic patterning which extends through every level, so that a constant synchronicity or meaningful correlation exists between astronomical events and human events, right? Uh, Basically, as above, so below, right? And so I think this was the other thing, was that, it's constantly to kind of like move away from the suggestion that the planets are causing things to happen. There is a meaningful correlation. Now, why is that? And I think that's the question. So again, the relationship between a specific planetary pattern and a human experience is best as seen as of a meaningful correlation or correspondence rather than simple linear one, right? Now, again, this will probably open up more questions for you, and the answer is to actually sit with those questions and let the answer emerge. That's what I've truly understood things to happen. And so there's definitely a synchronicity connection with the planets and any kind of given human experience. So in that sense, maybe the archetypal forces, so there's an archetypal causation, you can say. And I think he uses that term also, that maybe there is an archetypal conditioning, right? Uh, Rather than a specific, very physical kind of causation. I don't think that's the case, and I agree with that. Uh, Anyways, this will this question of why astrology works is going to be something which I believe is, has allowed me to, and it's taken me time, and I'm getting there to really understand that how we are the universe manifest, like in that sense, like, uh, so of course it will make sense. What's happening outside and what's happening out there is there because it's the same thing, right? Those archetypal forces are going to manifest inside us because we are the universe. Uh, Anyways, there are multiple ways, and that's a separate topic. But the article covers these basic questions, which actually are the fundamental questions. I agree. I'm sure there's probably going to be more, but these are some fundamental questions. So, anyways, I love this article. I think this is definitely something that I'm going to be reading again and again and again. Uh, yeah, let me know what you all think about this. Bye.